Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's 6 o'clock UK time, and it is time for this month's installment of the AIM Technologies AIM Shop webinar. My name is James Colborn. I will be doing the presentation today, and we're going to be talking about Race Studio 3 analysis, or Race Studio Analysis 3. You can sort of alternate a little bit there, but it's the new software from AIM that was released best part of a sort of a month or so ago now, where you can analyze your data, your sessions, your files, and it is going to be the replacement for the software that we use today. Now, one of the things that I will say before we get going, and I'll ask, please, if you don't mind, keeping yourselves on mute, just in case there happens to be a phone ringing in the background or somebody comes in and offers you a cup of tea or something like that. It keeps the conversation down for everyone else. A few other elements of housekeeping. We have representatives here from AIM Technologies today. And so if you have questions throughout the presentation, just pop them in the chat box. They may be answered in the chat box. Otherwise, we will address them as we get closer to the end of the presentation. So lots of things for us to be able to keep the conversation going. Now, the last time we all met, and if you haven't seen the video, it's now available on YouTube. We talked about Race Studio Analysis 3. We looked at some of the basic sort of elements of the software. We looked at a sort of quick run through of your test database and some of the functionality that was available. Today, however, we are going to get into a conversation which really focuses on making sure we are paying attention to the advanced features that are available that allow us to customize our view. And it really is one of the areas that the enhanced Race Studio 3 analysis, or Race Studio Analysis 3, I can't get used to whichever way to say that yet, has advanced in terms of being able to give you the opportunity of customizing your experience and giving you the opportunity to give you a really good sort of view of your data. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to share this. Oh, screen two. Last time I presented the wrong screen. I'll share this one. So a quick thumbs up or a yes would be lovely to make sure that I'm actually presenting in the chat box. That would be great. Perfect. Thank you, Philip, James, everyone, which is great. So as I said, keep the chat going. Let's keep the conversation going, because today we're going to focus on really sort of working to customize your experience. And so here I am in Race Studio. Maybe I just hide the chat box. I'm in Race Studio, the Race Studio 3, the software. And if you remember from last time, if you click up here, you will be able to then enable the analysis section. Now, I've just noticed, or I noticed this morning when I updated my computer, that there is a new version. So if any of you are wondering where the new version is, just click on the little cloud icon and you will be able to see there's an update. There's actually a really good list of updates that are available. If there was something that you were finding a bit difficult in terms of the first version, if you click there and you download and you click here, I won't do it because I'm only showing my Race Studio 3 instance, it will give you a list of all the features that have been enhanced or updated since the last time we were actually using this. And so just make sure you're using the latest version, always sensible right now, because even though the software is out of beta, it's constantly being updated. Now, today we're going to look at a channel, sorry, I beg your pardon, a session that has lots of channels. Last time around, we did most of our setup using an AIM Solo 2. But what I wanted to do today, because I don't often do this because not everyone's got all the channels, but it's a really nice way of showing the power of the Race Studio 3 analysis software, is I was going to show you one that's got all sorts of channels. So as you can imagine, as somebody who's a bit of a sort of a data junkie when it comes to the track, I have lots of channels that are available to me on my race car. I also have a Smarty Cam, which gives you the video. And so we're really going to look at being able to customize that. Just as a reminder, I think it's worth being able to point out that today we're dealing with data and video linked together. So there's this little icon. If you've got a Smarty Cam and you've also got any of the devices that are logging data together, if you download them together, they will appear linked like this. If they don't, you can always link them together, and we talked about that last time. So we're going to open up this session here, and it's going to load the last session that I was showing in the webinar from the last time I was chatting to you. And so the screen will make no sense to anyone. A lot of the numbers are going to be there. But rest assured, we're going to start customizing the view so it makes sense for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to shut down all of the tabs to start off with. So blank screen, and this really is the definition of a blank canvas. And before we get going on anything, there's a discipline that I want everyone who watches the webinars or uses any of the tutorials that we produce to keep thinking about something that we've all become so accustomed to. In fact, in some instances, it's become instantaneous with some of the software you use, but with Ray Studio 3, it's something you physically have to do. And that is saving your work as you go. And so to be able to do that, what we need to do is to be able to create a user profile. And this is the first feature that I'm going to show you today, which is going to be useful because as we customize our view and what we want to look at, we want to save the progress as we go so we can always refer back to that user profile. I have done it so many times already that I've clicked around and customized something, forgotten to hit save, turned off the instance of the session, come back again, and my data is not quite in the format that I wanted it in. So it's important to be able to make sure you do that. Now, to do that, we're going to start up here in the top left, and we're going to click on this gear icon. Right now, the profile could be called anything. Right now, it's called GPS data analysis because that's the one that I used last time we were here. But you can now start to save your own profile. So click here, click Save Profile As. This is very similar to if you're saving a word processor document, a spreadsheet document, anything like that. You want to be able to save it as something. And so today we're going to do AIM webinar demonstration, just for fun. And so I'm going to click on OK. And the first thing you're going to notice is that within this file, it's going to say AIM webinar demonstration. So now I've started to create a profile that I will be able to refer to at any particular point when I load a data file. And I'll talk to you about different views and forms of user profile as we go through. But this is the starting platform. This is you saving this blank canvas. And so that's there. As you keep adding to this user profile, if you click on this gear icon that's on the top left here, you're going to click Save Profile. That'll just save your progress as you go. This will make sure that as you put in sort of experiences and customization that are right for you, you will always remember where you are. So that's the first thing. The next thing I will say, and you'll be saying, well, this is the worst demonstration ever. We're still looking at a blank canvas, and we'll get there. The next thing we need to be able to talk about is making sure that we have a purpose in mind as to why we're going to start, looking at the data and what our goal is in mind. If you've seen any webinars that I've done previously with AIM Technologies, AIM Sports in the US, I've even got some of these conversations that are on my personal YouTube channel as well, which we'll make sure I link to as we go forward. You'll see a conversation that is, why do you download your data? Now, it seems like the oddest thing to say, but there really are sort of like 2 or 3 reasons why you would download your data. Now, the first is that you would download your data to be able to look at driver improvement. This is the lowest common denominator in relation to why you download your data. The second is you may want to be able to look at this data for vehicle health. And if you are, for example, somebody who wants to monitor the health of your vehicle from every aspect, such as oil pressure to temperatures to revs and all sorts of aspects, that's the second reason. And the third, and there could be a million variations, this is just the 3 that I usually pick, is that we want to be able to look at, is there aspects of chassis development that will help us improve driver performance? And so what we're going to look at is a few of those today as we start to customize the view. And the first one I'm going to look at as we go forward is we're going to start setting up some views for driver improvement. And so to be able to use that, my go-to in Ray Studio 2, which was the old software, and the new one is I start out with something called the time distance report. So you can see here, I'm clicking on these buttons here, and as I do, it creates tabs across the top that are here. This one's called time distance. One of the new features, which I'll start thinking about in terms of customization later on, is you can start naming these tabs in the latest version, but we're going to stick to the naming conventions that's given from AIM at this point, because chances are, if you want to go back and refer to something, if I say time distance, these two will correlate. So this is a view that many of us are, to some degree, comfortable with the old software, really pretty comfortable with the new software as well. And for me, this is the main form of analysis where I want to be able to analyze how a driver is doing. So when I think about how a driver is doing, I break that down into key components. The first is I want to be able to see aspects of where time is being gained and lost. I want to see why that's happening, and that's usually looking at the speed trace. And then I want to be able to see what the driver is doing to be able to make that happen. Now, in previous instances of these webinars, I've used GPS data to be able to do this, and you can see that overlaid on the screen right now. But as said, in today's webinar, we're actually going to look a little bit more at some more channels that many of us may have. Now, mine are coming in from sensors that are on my car, but you may be getting this data coming in from your ECU. But if you've got the channel on the left-hand side here, we can start using that to be able to analyze the data. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of these channels. So if you notice I'm clicking here, there's a little X button that's here, and I'm getting rid of those. And so right now I've got I would say I'd have nothing on the screen, but it does default to one view. So right now it's got RPM that's there. If I get rid of it, we're back to that blank canvas and the start of our customization. Now, the first thing I wanted to be able to see was speed. Now I have choices in some instances of vehicles that I've driven, but for me, and for 99.9% of any car that I've ever driven in the last 10 years, I generally tend to like using GPS speed. It just seems to be the easiest, most consistent. Now, it doesn't help you with things like wheel spin, but today we're just looking at driver development. So I've got two options at this point. I can scroll through and go, oh, I want to be able to find it. Or one of the beauties of the new system is I can just type it in here, and it narrows down all the channels that have got GPS in the title, and I'm going to pick GPS speed. So that's the first thing I want. The next thing I want to be able to see is what the driver's doing. So I can add in some additional variables here that I want to be able to see, let's say, for example, throttle. So I can see throttle position, and you'll notice that if I click on these channels, they go from being here to here. This means they're activated. And if you want to be able to sort of see what that means in relation to the channel list, if I take that out of the search box, notice that all of these channels are available. The ones that are in bold and on the left-hand side are the ones selected, which will also appear up here. So now we've got throttle. Well, one of the other major variables that I want to see from the driver is I also want to be able to see brake, which I can't spell. So I'm going to say I want to see the brake pressure, and let's just say front for the time being. That gives us a good indication of what's happening there, which is great. But I also want to be able to see what's happening with RPMs, because typically I want to be able to see where our gear changes and everything are. And so I'm just going to type on RPM here, and there's my RPMs that are there. And so that's a view that I've got set up already. Now, here's what I want to do. I want to go back up here, click on Save Profile. And so now I'm back to in a position where as if I ever loaded this user profile up again, I'll get the same view where the channels are in terms of what's going on. So this is the view that I want to be able to see. Now, there's a few things you may be noticing on here that you may want to customize. The first, and I'm one of these sort of people, I like having a specific order of channels. I don't know if it's just a personal quirk or if it's something that people like, but as I read something, I like things in a certain order. And so I've got a couple of options that I can do here. The first is I can go up to the top right-hand side here, and I can click on mixed. And here I can select which order I want those to be in. So I could say, for example, speed at the top, then RPMs would be 2, brake would be, throttle would be 3, or brake would be 4. So that's one way of being able to sort them. And if I click on save here, it will remember that order that I've chosen. Now, one of the things that you may be saying, well, why have you done that? Isn't this for overlaying two things together? What it is. And the reason that you typically use this function is either to do it in that order, which a lot of people do, and it's one of the things that I generally tend to do. It makes it easier that I can count here in terms of the sessions I've got. The other option you have, if you go back to this view, which is oftentimes the default, is you can also sort them here. So I can go into a custom sort, and I can choose the channel order. And here I can say, for example, I want GPS speed at the top and those sort of things. Now, the reason that I oftentimes don't do this is that there are a lot of channels, and moving them around takes a lot of time. But if you do like this, you can always move them around for your particular preference. So either way, this is how you want to be able to customize your view. And so simply, I'm going to keep doing this. And this is as much for discipline for me as it is for anyone else watching, is that I keep clicking Save Profile so I don't forget. So I'm starting to line these up. I'm going to go back to that mixed view because I like that view that's there. The next thing as we look at it is you may be saying, well, okay, well, where's the other laps and where's the overlay? Well, that's where we get into this lap session here. And if this is a 52.4, I want to be able to see, I don't know, let's see something that's way off in terms of time to demonstrate. And so now I've got all of the variables I need to be able to assess and start looking at data analysis in terms of the lines on the track and lines on the map. And so this is one of the key sort of components of the time distance. And this is something that we should all be familiar with because it's very similar to Race Studio 2 analysis. And so same thing we can always do. We can color these in, we can change them around. Now, you may also be noticing that there's a difference here that varies from the previous version. Typically in Race Studio 2 analysis, the default view was the fastest line would always be the solid, and then the variable line would be the slowest one. But in here, you can see that we can mix this up and we can change it. So we can make this the reference or this the reference and change how the view looks depending on how you want to be able to see the data. If I said, for example, here that now we've got the blue lap, which is the fastest, and the red, you can see where the red starts to lose time. Similarly, we can mix that up. So a lot of options are available to you. All along, you've also got the opportunity of being able to follow these little dots down here that where you are on track, and you can zoom in and out and see line and all sorts of stuff that's there. So that's a nice feature. Now, we covered a lot of this in the last webinar, so you might be saying, well, let's get a little bit further along. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Save Profile here, because I want to address something that we didn't talk about last time, but I did get some questions, which is, how do I change these things across the top here? And these things being the segments that are going to be used to analyze different areas of the track. Now, when you used to use the old software, which many of us may still do today, if you wanted to create these, then you would have had to have gone into the map manager and you would have had to have made a new map. Now, in the new software, as long as there is a GPS file where Race Studio 3 analysis can find where you are on track and in terms of geography, it will automatically create segments for you. So if you're happy with green being straight, blue being right hands, and red being left hands, you can see that the track has already broken, the software has broken the track into segments. And these segments can be used to be able to analyze as we go through different aspects of the overall view. But if you're somebody like me, I like to be able to customize my own views of my own tracks. And so one of the things that I'm going to do today is to show you how to potentially be able to do that. To be able to do that, the first thing we're going to do is click up here in this little map icon. And what we're going to do is right now it's set to default Race Studio 3 splits, the splits that came with it. Now, because this is actually my machine that I analyze on my data, I've actually got my own splits on here, but I'm going to show you how I did it so that you can sort of potentially replicate or mimic this yourself. To do that, you're going to click on the cog icon. And I think I've said it in a few webinars before, but if you're curious if there are additional functions available to you anywhere in the software, look for a few things that you can click on. And I'm sort of, you know, I think I said it last time, I'm the person who sees a big red button, I'll probably push on it. And it'll, because the curiosity makes me want to go into things. And so where we're here, if you click on this cog icon, you have an option of being able to do certain things. You can rename them, you can delete them, you can export them. And we'll talk about that potentially in further webinars where we start talking about passing data and sharing information. But what we're going to do here is we're going to click on clone split divisions. And what we're going to do is we're going to brands, indie, aim webinar. We click on OK, and there's our split. And if I click on that and I click on allow that and click on OK, it's going to say, do you want to use the Brands Hatch Indie circuit also for all of the sessions you run on the same day? Now, you've got a choice here. You can say yes and you can say no. I'm going to say yes for the purposes of simplicity. But this is just saying, do you want to apply this track layout on all of the instances from today? So I'm going to click on yes. And right now, nothing's changed up here. But that's okay, because all we've done is we have mirrored the straight, right, left that was provided by AIM. And I always like that to be an option because you always have that as your default base to go back. But now we're going to start working on changing it and adjusting it. So to do that, what we're going to do is we are going to hover over these sections and notice another sort of area of curiosity. The mouse turns into a finger. And by turning into a finger, it gives you some options. And so if I right click here, I'm going to be presented with a new menu of options that are going to be available to me. And it's the top section here, which is the most interesting for us to be able to choose. It's going to allow us to do a few things that we can work on. Now, what I'm going to do here is I am going to start to demonstrate how you can customize your own splits. And then what I'm probably going to do is load the ones that I've already made, because otherwise this would be the longest webinar in the world while you watch me figure out what's going on in terms of this, that, and the other. So what we're going to do is we're going to go here. Now, we know on track, anyone who's driven Brands Hatch knows that this part of the track here is called Paddock Hill Bend. And so we can see that because, you know, part of the giveaway is this indicator. That's not on every track. I think this is because this is Google identifies it as a point of interest. But what we can do is we can say, well, I want to be able to see the whole of that as you go into the corner, you slow down, and then you accelerate out. And so it's not quite aligned as I'd like it to be. So I can do one of two things. I can either right click here, I can merge with the next split. That makes a much bigger split for me to be able to use. Or I can hover over it where you get this little indicator and I can shrink it down to size and I can say, okay, well, here's a good place to stop because you can see my acceleration out of the corner, a little bit hesitation here, or I can make it a little bit smaller or bigger depending on what I want. And then what I can also do is I can decide, do I want to keep it right hand, left hand in terms of the colors, or do I want to color it myself? And so here, for example, I'm fine with it being blue, but if I wanted it red, I can just change the type of thing. This has no bearing on, you know, how you analyze and what the data shows up like. This just changes the color, so it's easier to be able to see segments when you look at it. Or as far as I'm concerned, that's how it works. And so we'll leave it as a blue, which we started with. And so that's your first split. And you can do it all the way through, but here's the bit that I really like. When I lived in America, all tracks were numbered. All tracks had corners that were numbered. There are a few that didn't, but most of them had numbers. And so you'd be like, okay, well, how did you do it in corner number 1? And in some degree that was easier, but then I came back and lived in the UK and every corner's got a name. So if I right click here, I'm going to rename this, for example, and I'm going to say that this is Paddock Hill Bend. Now I can say Paddock Hill Bend, and you'll get that shows up there. Now, the reason that I'm going to recommend at this point that you don't do it in terms of its full name is because depending on how many segments you have, it may be difficult to see what you're talking about. So I'm actually going to rename this and just call this Paddock. We call it Paddock Hill, whatever you want. But you know at Brands Hatch, you know what this means in terms of where it is. Now you can do that all the way along and change your splits until such time as you've got them how you want to be able to lay them out. But if you wanted to do what I've done, and very sort of anyone who's watching who knows cooking shows, here's one I've made earlier. Here's an example of ones that I've created earlier. So if I click on these ones, which I've already made myself, do I want to change them for the full day? Yes, I do. You can now see that I've set this up for all the names of the way that I want to split up Brands Hatch Indie. Now you'll be like, okay, well, this is useful. It helps out, but where are you going to use this later on? I'm going to look at customizing, but here's what I would recommend. Click here, save your profile. It gets a bit boring and I'm going to be repeating myself, but that's a really important component as we go through. Now, by setting up those segments, it also allows us to start analyzing certain pieces of information. For example, if I go back to the laps and I pick a lap, what I can do is I can then say, wow, where did I see the most gain or loss? And I want to zoom in a certain area. All I need to do is I need to double click on an area. It's usually, this is an area where there's time that's gained and lost. And you can see here, this is representative of just 1/10, but it gives you an idea. You can start looking at what's happening by double clicking in the segment itself. If you want to double click out of the segment, you just click on the top. Same thing with Paddock Hill Bend. There's variance that is here. And so it gives you an idea of being able to start zooming into those segments as you see them. So it's a very useful feature to be able to use. But we're going to leave the time distance of that because we want to keep developing and keep building on this particular profile. And so what I'm going to do next, and if anyone's interested in terms of, well, these aren't all sort of clearly showing up on the page, some of the little tricks that you had in Race Studio 2 analysis still exist in Race Studio 3. For example, if I want the RPMs to all fit on the page, I just double click that. If I double click on the name, it fills it up so I've got a better view of the channels and the segments that I'm doing. And so just, you know, simple ways of being able to navigate. Nothing's really changed too much between what's going on. But remember, we're customizing our experience. So once we've customized our tracks, this is going to be super helpful for further customization as we go forward. Because the next thing I'm going to load up is I've got all sorts of options that are here. But what I'm going to load up excuse me, open up next is the split times report, because all of us are always fascinated, which is what my theoretical best lap be. It's one of my favorite things to look at from a driver development point of view. So I'm going to click on this tab here, and the split times report is going to show up. Now, one of the things you may know immediately is you're like, well, hold on. These naming conventions now represent these splits as we've got them lined up here, which is a nice way of being able to look at the data. But I've still got the view from the last time I did the webinar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean this up a bit so it's easier to see. Now, what I've got here is I've got this set up with all of the data that's available. So it got a bit busy, but here you can see that if I click this, it adds in information such as the distance within you drove within the segment and those sort of things. So I'm actually going to turn that off because it makes life a little bit easier to be able to see. I am going to then potentially decide if I want any coloration on there at all. I actually like this view. And then I'm just going to click up here, save the profile. It's going to be available for me for wherever I want it. And now what I can do is I can start digging into each of the segments. And because I created this segment analysis here in the split report, it not only represents here, but it also helps me view in terms of analyzing the line and different aspects down here in the graph that I have here. So for example, I can say, for example, where is the inconsistency? Well, the inconsistency is actually in the straight, but that's because there's not a huge amount of delta between. But there are different areas we can, like this Surtees corner is, anyone who's driven it knows it's a pretty sort of brave area. So if I click here, you'll notice it changes down here. And remember earlier I was talking about consistency of driver input. I say earlier, it was in the last session. One of the views that I like from a driver analysis point of view is I like being able to see this graph here, because the further apart these lines are, the more inconsistent the driver is through that particular area. The closer they are, the more consistent. So usually if you're on a straight, they're much closer together. If you're in a corner, they'll be further apart. And the more inconsistent you are, the further apart these will be. And you can see as I hover over these lines, everything changes here and everything changes here. So I like that view, happy with that. And click on Save Profile. The next thing I'm going to add in is a track map. So I'm going to click up here. Going to add in my track map, which is zoomed into that particular segment, which is there, but it just allows me to see a little bit more information zoomed in, plus data that I like to be able to hold based on information here. So, you know, one of the things that I've set up here is I like being able to see minimum speed. And, you know, if you're in a corner, minimum speed is always very useful. I like being able to see what the minimum and maximum G-forces are as we go through that. Now, this will be representative of the segment you're in. The smaller your segment, the more you have it on the corner, the better representation. So when you start thinking about those track maps that you're building and those segments you're creating, if you have them for corners, then all of a sudden you can dig in and be able to say, well, what was my minimum speed going through that corner? Now, you may be wondering, well, how did you set that up? And I'll show you how I did that. So I've clicked on the track map and I've got this available here. But also I have the opportunity to add information here in that segment. So I can delete these. So I can show you how I can start from scratch. And I can turn on the conditional formatting. And so we've just got a sort of information that's here. Now, if I click on Save, that's never going to remember what I had before. So I have to start customizing it for me. So I'm going to click here. And if I want to be able to see speed, I'm going to type in GPS. In fact, I might even type speed just to get it even more accurate. Going to tick there, and I'm going to say I want the minimum. And if I click on OK, now I've got the minimum speed by that segment. The next thing I'm going to want to be able to see is what were the G-forces like. So I can click here, and I can say, for example, GPS latitudinal, and I can click there. I can see minimum and maximum. And we can see that in terms of what the G-forces were being pulled through that corner as well. And it just gives us a way of being able to say on the best lap, was I going the fastest at minimum speed? And in this instance, no, I was actually a little bit quicker here, but it's not one of the slowest either. But at the same time, it gives me an idea in terms of how I was doing. But I did sort of almost carry the most amount of lateral G-force through that corner. And so as a result, it might be a question of line, which we can zoom in and have a look at and just analyze. So again, just customize it and save the profile. So now we've got this view that's set up for us, and it will never change unless we change it, which means if I load up any files, I can always go back to this. Now, one of the things that people generally tend to like as we go through this is that they also like looking at how the driver is doing if you've got video. And this is one of the best features. And so I'm going to click up here. And if you remember these 5 or 6 here, in fact, there's 7 because I can't count. represent all of the tabs you've got available to you. So if I click here, I'm loading up the data and the movie segment as well. And so this isn't quite in the format that I would personally like it to be right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to customize through this particular segment. Now, one of the things you may be saying at this point is, well, how is it lined up all of your data and video together? And that all starts at the import phase. And that's the beauty of Race Studio 3. If you have a SmartyCam, and I have been asked many times, can I do this with a GoPro? And the answer, unfortunately, for the GoPro owners is no. If you want to be able to do this, this is one of the real advantages of having a SmartyCam, because the SmartyCam data and the overlay and the setup is based upon all of the channels that are part of your system setup in the first place. And so you want to be able to sort of line it up. But because the SmartyCam is part of the connected AIM network, and if you're not sure what I'm talking about there, we've done a webinar on this previously where we talk about your network of all AIM devices connected together. It allows you to be able to analyze the data and video together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to customize this page, because this doesn't really sort of do much for me. And this is where I'm going to show you a new feature, which is all about what screens you look at and what you like on screen in terms of your personal view. Now, I don't use this. It's called the storyboard. Many presenters who do AIM webinars love this, and it's something that I have to personally learn how to use, because I know there's value there, but it's not something that I've taken the time to be able to learn. So I'm going to show you a new trick, which is adding and removing windows to this particular page. So I'm going to right click here. And one of the things you'll notice is that underneath this line, I have this option of adding and removing windows. So I'm actually going to remove this window. And when I do that, it's going to take that away. Now, if I click up here and click on Save Profile, it will always remember that view that I've just set up there. Now, the next thing I want to be able to do is I actually want the videos across the top, and I don't want them necessarily down the side. So I'm going to remove this window here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click here and I'm going to add a window at the bottom. And so now it's given me the option of being able to add something below here. I'm going to click on Save Profile and I'm going to choose a new window. And this is part of that sort of customization experience that really helps to start making this work for you, because these pages will always be available for you no matter what happens, depending on, unless you change them. So I'm going to choose here. And what I'm going to add in here is I want to be able to see a variation of the time distance, because what I want to see is I want to see what's happening on track. I want to see what the driver is doing in relation to input. And so then I'll have the complete picture. And I'll tell you what I mean by a complete picture in just a second. So I'm going to click on OK, and then it's going to add in the time distance. I'm going to reset that. So we go back to all of these segments that we looked at previously. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to resize this a little bit because it was a little bit big. I'm going to click on Save Profile so I don't lose where I am. And now I'm going to start clicking on channels that I want down here. So I'm going to probably add back in the ones that I had previously. So I've got RPMs, I want brake, I want GPS speed, and I want throttle. Now, one of the things you may be looking at, and some of you may have experienced this already, I got an email from somebody just today who said, everything's overlaid on top of each other. What do I do? And this is really a function which I've seen has been brilliant. Anyone who's watched Formula One races lately with the AWS analysis that is there, oftentimes you see them show both brake trace and throttle on the same line. And that's what this functionality is designed to be able to do. But the more channels you add, the busier it gets. So we need to clean that up. To do that here, or any time distance, you just click on these. So you can click on there and it will tile them for you. Or you can do the, if you like it back in the sort of the mixed side, you can just do the overlay and they'll just put them all back. And so this just gives you the option of deciding what you want. Now, if you're somebody who wants a mixture, and let's do a mixture on this one just for fun, I'm going to click on this mixed tile and I'm going to start at the top with GPS speed, just like we did with the last view that we set up. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to do RPMs as 2, but then I'm going to put brake and throttle on the same one. So theoretically, you should be able to see where the brake comes down, the throttle comes down and the brake kicks in. You can see that oftentimes that's an overlay. Now, the difficulty that you have when you're comparing laps is that you can't easily color these. But if you wanted to be able to see one single lap on its own, so if I did this, for example, and I turned a lap off, now I can start to color these in. And here, for example, you can see that one's green and one's sort of purple. So let's make that a really garish color so you can see it easily on the screen. So if we turn that yellow, you can see that I'm coming here and the brake is in yellow and the throttle is in green. So I should have made it red and green and go and stop. But here you can see that we can see them overlaid onto each other. If you want to save that, just click on save here, and that will always be like that for you. The moment, however, you add another lap, you'll go back to per lap color. And so it's important to be able to note what you want to be able to look at from that point of view. But one of the things you may have also noticed is that these are pretty hard to see, these lines. Again, further customization, if you don't like them being that small, you can color them in. So you can go all the way to sort of crayon mode, which is not always the easiest, although sometimes I have to say that this is quite an easy way of being able to see what's going on in terms of the channels that are here. And you can vary the degree of sort of thickness that you have to be able to look at the content. You'll always have over here as well, for example, the map as to where you are. So if you click anywhere on the map, it will take the video to where you were, and it will take you to where you were on this map. And so if I click up here and add laps, and let's add another one. Let's add this one here. Let's add an awful one that's here. And then we'll just start looking at where the deltas are in time, which is here. We can see that there's a lapping car that's here, and we can see where we're going on track. Now, I showed a little bit of this in the last time we were looking at it, but what I didn't talk about was how I got there in terms of setup and how I put it all together. So here is your option in terms of being able to customize that view for you. And so this is really sort of like a key component. Plus, you'll always have these segments. So if we wanted to be able to see what happened in this Graham Hill bend, what I need to do is double click, bring the cursor back here, and I can just press play, and it will show me what's happening here as we go forward. You can see on the right-hand video of the screen, there's probably a car there, which it is. And we just zoomed into that segment very quickly to be able to see what's happening. And we can also note that my line down here was compromised. And so you can see that if we scroll back to the beginning of that, notice how the line that we have here, I don't take the natural racing line, I hug the curve on the left-hand side here. So we can also see that it represents here in line, it represents here in terms of time, it also represents here in terms of video. And so it just gives you that option of lining them all up to be able to see what's happening. So it's a lovely, useful feature. Later on, I'm going to do a seminar on tips and tricks in terms of looking at aspects of being able to clip and cut out videos and chunks of data and everything, but we're going to cover that later on because I want to be able to move on now to other aspects of customizing your experience. So right now, this is always going to be available for you. And the bravest thing that you can do is you ever want to be able to make sure, if you want to click on load profile and put the AIM GPS analysis, that's what we had when we finished off the last webinar that we looked at. It was just GPS signals, and we didn't have anything more than just the track map when we covered that. But because today we've been creating a new one, all I need to do is click on load profile, AIM webinar demonstration, and I'm right back to where I left off. Here are all the files. Here's the information I was just talking to you about. And so hopefully, the more you get used to saving that profile, the more chance you have of being able to come straight back to this. And remember, one of the things that people often say to me is, I don't have time for data analysis at the track. And I completely respect that, especially people who have to tend to their own vehicles, change tires, fix repairs that have gone awry, have a good old natter, go to the driver's meeting, whatever need be. But one of the beauties of these user profiles as we go through is that you will be able to get the data just like that. Straight from downloading the data, know what you want to analyze, click on it, review it, turn the laptop off, and go and do your other activities. And that's what's really important. And the reason I say that is we're going to get into another component of the reasons why you download your data, is that we want to be able to have a look at something such as vehicle health. And vehicle health is something that's very important to me because I drive, as you can see, quite an old car that doesn't have all the modern safety aspects of protecting you from over revs and those sort of things. So I'm always very keen to make sure I'm monitoring what's happening with the engine. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to keep this in the same profile. One of the things that I've done historically in previous webinars is I've shown you having different user profiles for different aspects of a webinar. But what we're going to do today is we're actually going to use all the same profile. And to do what I'm just describing here is I'm going to click up and I'm going to click on something called the channels report. And right now it's sort of a bit of a non-event in terms of what's happening on this particular chart. But the channels report allows me to be able to see certain key channels numerically and graphically on a quick overview of the entire lap to be able to make some assessments as what we're doing. And so on this particular view, there's some things that I want to be able to see, which will make me feel comforted that either the engine's running fine and the car's running fine, or I need to do something about it. And if you remember earlier, we had that conversation where I was just saying, don't have time at the track, but at the same time, we want to be able to monitor what's happening. Channels report is a very quick and easy way of being able to sort of customize your view. So we've added another tab here. I know you're going to be like, oh my God, how many times is you going to click on that same button, save profile? But the more you get the habit of doing it, the less likely you are to be able to do what I've done, which is clicked out of it on a profile, click back in, and I've forgotten to save half of what I've done. And so that's important. So I'm going to start adding channels to this. And this is your functionality to be able to do all sorts of things. You don't have to use this for engine health. I'm just using the channels report as a great way of being able to demonstrate how to monitor the health of your car. And so, or bike, or any particular vehicle you've got. And so these are the buttons which are really important in a channels report, because these are effectively your add a button and sort of adjust or change it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here, and it's going to allow me to search for a certain piece of information. So this is engine health. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on, well, let's say the first one I want to be able to see is, have I over-revved the engine? So I'm going to click on RPM. You may be wondering what these are. Don't worry, that's going to be in the next webinar, because I'm going to talk about math channels, and I'm going to talk about customizing, your own particular channels of data. So don't worry about what those say today. If you ever were wondering what this means, and this may be part of the next webinar, this one means, did I go over a certain max RPM, and did it trigger a warning or a status variable, which I have, which is 7,000 RPM. How far did I travel in time, and how far did I travel in distance? And this will allow me to be able to see on one particular lap, did I go for 300 feet over 7,000 RPM, which may be bad for the engine, but if I had a quick, 3 or 4 milliseconds over 7,000 RPM, that might be just a case of nothing to worry about, or shift the lights a little bit. So it's important to be able to, and I'll show you how to do that in the next webinar. But for today, we're just going to look at adding in some channels. So we're going to say, I want to see the RPM and I want to see the max, because who cares about the minimum RPMs in this instance? I want to see the max. So I'm going to click there, and it's going to show me what the RPMs are. And so you can see that it's, probably got some sort of things to address for myself in terms of what's happening here. And we can go into more detail and have a look at what's happening in that aspect. I'm going to click on plus, and I'm now going to add in some other variables. I want to be able to see temperatures. So you can type in anything you like if there's a channel that relates to it. So the next thing I want to see is water temperature. And here I want to see the maximum, and I want to see the average, because I want to see if the engine's getting really hot and what the progression is like through a session. So now I've got the maximum and I've got the average, and seeing how it develops. And so right now, nothing to worry about there. I'm going to click here on oil. Whoops, if I can type properly. And I'm going to click on oil pressure. And in this instance, I want to see the minimum, and I want to see the average. And that's going to show up. I also want to be able to see the voltage, because in this type of car, we don't have an alternator. So if your battery fails, your race is over. So you want to be able to watch what's happening with your voltage. And in this instance, we want to be able to see the minimum, because this is really important. When a minimum on a voltage starts to hit a certain threshold, certain things won't fire, like spark plugs. And so you want to be able to see that one in terms of what's happening there. This is actually getting quite low. So there's a question of whether this is a charging issue or whatever need be. Not too worried about that. Then I've got other aspects here, and I can have a look at pressures. So I can also look at the pressures of the front left, rear left, front right and rear right tire pressures. And so let's see what the average was for those. So I can see what the average build is in of temperature. And so now all of a sudden, every single lap, I've got a view of this data that I have there, which is fantastic. If I click in any of these, what you'll start to see is I have a chart that appears. And this is really nice. You can adjust the size of this as you want to. I'm going to click up here and click on Save Profile. And you can start seeing information about each of these charts. And so you can see, for example, how's the pressure doing in terms of growth, and all sorts of things that you can analyze. And notice every time you do, it changes the order of the laps. And so I always am one of those who likes outlap and in-lap, and then seeing what progressively happens through the race. And so that's the view that we have in terms of channel report. Again, sorry, I'm just going to keep doing it. Probably not apologize each time. But then we can start to color this in. And so some of the buttons that are up here that we may want to be able to view the data, we can see this by the split. So this is something that people potentially would like to be able to see, which is what's happening in relation to the performance of your car in each of the splits. Remember, these splits relate to these splits, which relate to these splits. So that when you set this up, it empowers every other aspect of the software to give you what you need in terms of analysis. If you don't want that to necessarily show up and you just want it to sort of display, you click on that and you go back to the main page that's there in terms of information. The next thing is you can have some variances in terms of average and the variances. That's nice. And then what you can do is you can then start to color it in. So you could have a conditional formatting, or you can have sort of a graphical conditional formatting that shows you, in terms of regression and how things grow. And so you can customize this view as you like. Now, one of the things that you have here, is you probably noticed, is that you've got, what do I want to see? Now, if you want to see lapse and you want to see progression of what happens with, let's say, for example, the water temperature, I can see that as lapse progress, I can change this to show what the water temperature is doing. One of the things you may be thinking is, well, hold on a second, I want to customize this a bit more. I want some more graphs. I want some more overlays. I want to be able to see some more information on the screen than just what's shown on the default. And that's where we get into the right click again. And so if I right click anywhere here, I can add a window. I'm going to add one at the bottom of the page here, and I get this list. And if I click on choose, I can add all sorts of things. Now, I want another one of these. That'd be nice. So if I click on channel report graph, notice that I now have the option of changing this and adding one of these. And if I, for example, remove this window, and then I click on this one and add a window to the right, I can choose channels report graph. And I can have a look at that data that's here, and I can start changing this around. So this one is, let's say we make this one maximum water temperature. This one, let's say we do this one, I don't know, minimum oil pressure. So we can see what's happening with the oil pressure, those sort of things. You can start to customize the view to give you an overlay of what you want to be able to see from a quick glance in terms of health of the engine. But you can add whatever you want to be able to add here in terms of activity. Now, one of the things that I have had a tendency to do is to add too many of these particular windows. And if I start doing this, and I can add anything in here. I can, for example, want to be able to put a track map in here so I can see where the splits are. I can add them in. Now you're saying, well, hold on a second. That's getting a bit busy and I want to be able to adjust that. And so one of the things that you can do is you can start to customize what happens on this screen. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to click up here. I'm going to click on this button. And I'm going to say for the track map, hide when I press the space bar. For the channels reports, hide when I hit the space bar. On this one, I'm going to hide when I hit the space bar. Click on OK. Now, if I hit the space bar, I just go back to that nice clean view, and I can see the information I need, and then I can add back in the busyness in terms of what I want to be able to see in terms of activity that's on there. So all of these are customizable for your own particular preference, and all you need to do is keep clicking on Save Profile, and it will be there no matter what you want to do. Now, one of the things you may be wondering is what does with this being your actual profile, what does it actually look like? Well, because we just saved that for the demonstration, I can actually show you what I've got here in relation to how I've got this set up for my vehicle, just in case you're wondering how I would analyze my particular data. Now, this is my driver analysis. This is I want to be able to see what I'm doing very quickly. It's a time distance report. It's a track map. It's the split times report. And it's data and movies. And that's my actual personal view that I have set up that I would look at with this data to be able to see what is going on at whichever particular point in time. I think this was the lap we looked at last time where there's just endless Formula 3 cars knocking about and bullying us Formula Fords a little bit that are there. Similarly, others may be interested in terms of what's your vehicle health report look like. So mine looks like this. And so I've added in some additional components on here that give me the opportunity of adding in a scatter graph. And we're going to cover some more of these because they require a little bit more time to discuss in the next webinar we do next month. But you can see this is my personal view. And if I hit the spacebar on this one, I get a nice, clean, simple view, adding in those math channels that I talked about. So you can see that, remember I said, tell me when the maximum RPM is on and how far I traveled in feet and time, 8 feet, 10.1 of a second, because I went over 7,000 RPM on that lap. So it's not a huge amount, but it's something to bear in mind if it happens more than once. I've got water temperature. I've got average tire pressures. I've got an alarm here that tells me if I've had a puncture. And so it just gives me information that I need very quickly, or I can have a look at this and have a look at some of the trending data if I've got time. This one, if you're ever interested, shows me what happens to oil pressure based upon how much lateral acceleration happens. And what I'm looking at here is, do I lose oil pressure in high G-force corners, which I don't, which is nice. And so that's one that I have there. And then the final one that you may be interested in having a look at is I also have one for tire pressure monitoring as well, that shows me all the information that I need in relation to the vehicle tires. And so this shows me what the maximum grip was at which pressure. This shows me how long I was at that particular pressure through the session, and this shows me all the information. And these are actual ones that I use on this vehicle to be able to sort of work through that. And so this is how I've set up sort of like today's webinar to be able to go into some of this sort of analysis. Next time round, we're going to cover off on some other key aspects of looking at math channels, further customization and working on. But what I want to leave you with today, before we go into question and answer, is there certain key things that I think are really important that we all start with. And I'm going to go back to the profile to start off with, and that is today's webinar demonstration. The first is that this is likely the default page that you use, so get very comfortable with this one to start off with. But more than anything else, I recommend you get very comfortable with being able to set up the splits. And the reason being is that this has such a material impact on the functionality of all of the other solutions that you use as you customize it. Now, you don't need to name them. That's just an option that I chose in terms of segments that you have. Some of the things that I've done in the past is I've actually created the 3 segments for, let's say, Silverstone National that match the report that you get from TSL timing. If you're here in the UK, use TSL timing a lot of the times, that you can then say, well, these are my particular segment times. Wow, look what someone else is doing, and analyze your performance test. So these are all options, but know why you're setting them up. The next thing I'd also recommend then is to make sure that you're comfortable with a lot of the options that are sort of around with the settings. And you have any instance that you see a cog, click on it, a spanner or a wrench, click on it, because this is how you get comfortable with customizing your own personal views going forward. That's sort of really important. And then the last thing I'd recommend is just start adding in which features work well for you, because in many respects, I think that the customization capabilities of Race Studio 3 analysis are so sort of complex is the wrong word. You have so many options and so many variations that the number of sort of personal nuances and variations that you have are limitless or endless in terms of options. And so I think it starts getting comfortable with you, but really start sort of getting used to clicking on these buttons to understand what does what. And then as we go through each of the webinars, we'll cover off on different aspects. And so with that, I'm going to stop. I'm going to see if we've got any questions for today's webinar. Feel free to add them in the chat box and we'll see how we get on. You can also shout your question out if you want to as well. If you want to come off mute, that's not a problem as well. Will the recording be posted somewhere? Yes, it will. We find, the folks at AIM Technologies put the recordings onto their YouTube channel, of which I'm sure James or someone can link to here, or send out an email where you can see all of the webinars from the last time. You'll also find additional sort of webinars available from the previous time we've done this, and many of us who create videos online. I published 4 this morning. I'm not going to publish them all in one go because there's a lot of editing. So I did 4 of the Getting Used to Using Race Studio Analysis 3 tutorials, and I plan on doing sort of 3 or 4 a month, going through each of the functionality as we go. So you will find a lot of options, but this one will be available online probably in the next 24, 48 hours. Any other questions? Did you say last month's was up now, James? Yes, it is. It is available right now. And if all you need to do is click on that link that James has posted, look at the videos, and you'll find the video is there. And it talks about, sort of the thing that I think is really important in that first one is how to get your data into Race Studio Analysis 3 and basics of test database and getting used to it. Today, we really went into setting up some of the personal view, and you get a sort of a glimpse into how my brain works in terms of how I like to see data. But again, it just sort of gives you an idea of how to start working and setting up for yourself. Other questions? Usually you start off slow and then there's questions start coming in thick and fast. Was this useful for everyone today? Hopefully it was. And more importantly, not that, if someone's going to know this was terrible, if you do that, please feel free to write that, what would you like us to cover in the next one? Because so far, next one we've lined up things like math channels to be able to talk about that, XY plots, or scatter graphs, so to speak, the histogram, look at some of the other features which I've experienced are less used than what we talked about today. So anything extra that people would like us to cover, or anything like to cover again? Math channels, lovely. That's good feedback. Brilliant. All right. So with us coming close to the 1 hour mark, I am going to be around for the next, we'll be around for the next sort of 5 minutes or so if anyone wants to ask some questions then. Otherwise, I'll end the webinar here. So thank you all very much for attending, and we'll see you next month, and look out for this online.